All right. Hi, everybody. To open up a live transcript, click the Live on Custom live streaming service in the top left corner and select View Stream on otter.ai Live Notes. Okay. So this is Larry, and this is the Trauma and Asexuality panel. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We have some content notes for some content warnings for this panel. So for sexual assault, rape, relationship abuse, child abuse, and possibly more. Right, so give me a second, we're going to do our Acknowledgement of Country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to the elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I am on, the Turrbal people, and I invite each panelist to do an individual acknowledgement of country as they introduce themselves. The first is going to be Mel.
Hi everyone, my name is Mel O'Connor. I am calling today from the Wathaurong country, and I would like to pay my respects to the Wathaurong people and especially their elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'm a PhD candidate of Deakin University. I study representations of asexuality in young adult literature, especially why so many of those representations are negative and what can be done to intervene.
Right, thanks, Mel. Casey, could you go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Casey. I use they, them pronouns. I am living and working in Nam, so I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be in the room, in the Zoom room today. In terms of who I am, I'm a person. I'm a person who is ace and has experience of trauma. I'm currently doing lived experience work with Berry Street, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And yeah, general advocacy, activism work in the LGBTQI+ world, as well as mental health and family violence and disability worlds, and studying education at uni. That's me.
Thanks, Casey. Kate, could you go next?
Yeah, my name's Kate. I am from the ACT. My pronouns are she and her, and I live and work on Ngunnawal land. So I like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Ngunnawal people, and extend my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was stolen and never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I am a asexuality advocate, activist, and I also do many jobs. I do what people pay me to do. I do small contract work because I am a woman with a disability who lives and works from my bed primarily. I do asexuality activism primarily on the subject of violence and oppression towards asexual people, trying to raise awareness of this, and most particularly about the sexual violence that asexual people experience because they are asexual. And that is the reason that drives me, is partially because I am a survivor of this myself, and partially because I have found that so many other people are survivors of this, and it's not talked about, and it needs to be talked about. And so that is why it's something that is so important to me, and why I'm so excited that we are having this panel today.
Thanks, Kate. Gemma, could you go next?
Me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Gemma, and I live in Sydney. And sorry, I need to make sure I pronounce this correctly because I need my notes. And I would like to acknowledge the Wallamedigal people of the nation and recognise their elders past, present, and emerging. community since 2005, and I have been part of the moderator team on Avon, and I was a project team manager early in the mid to late 2000s. And I currently run the Australian ACEs Facebook page, Oceania Asexuals, and I've just started an Asia Pacific Asexuals group because we had some contact from the Bangladeshi ACEs, and we thought it would be really good to have some regional contact and collaboration, which is what I'm really passionate about when it comes to asexuality and getting the Asexual 101 out there, but also 102, because we all get a little bit sick of doing 101, and basically keeping it as a current topic and keep getting people engaged and telling people who might not know about it, you know, a little bit more about it, and keeping the topic going. And I'm on this panel because I have relationship experience with sexual coercion and also emotional abuse and a splattering of things in my history that I apparently, when I didn't realize, does actually come under the category of trauma. And with Kate, this was her idea, this was her baby, and I really wanted to make that happen for her and for everybody that needed that to be, all these things to be said that never get said. So yeah.
All right, thanks, Gemma. And Jo, could you go as well, please?
Yeah, hi there. I am Jo. I live and work in Glasgow in Scotland. I think it's really amazing that you're all acknowledging those who've gone before you, and those whose land you're on. Here in Scotland, things are a bit different, so I don't have a tribe to acknowledge, but I do acknowledge those who've gone before me, and I would like to acknowledge all those who've walked before me in coming out as an asexual. I am a therapist. I've been working as a therapist now for about 17 years. I came out as asexual having first heard the word in my late 40s. I'm a lot older than that now. I'm also a survivor of trauma, and I would say probably a quarter of my clients identify as asexual and come to me with all kinds of traumatic histories. I also do training for an LGBT organisation that trains therapists to be competent in all areas of working with LGBT people, and particularly obviously in the area of asexuality. And I offer a module on working with conversion therapy. So those who've been victims of conversion therapy or survivors of conversion therapy, and unbelievably, or perhaps not, in the UK, the largest sexuality group to be in that category are asexual people. So that's something I've been doing a lot of work on. So thank you for inviting me.
No worries. All right. So the first question we're going to start with, just to get it out of the way, can trauma make you ace? And if so, are you still valid? Mel, could you go first again?
Oh, it's a thorny one. Personally, that's not how I arrived at my asexuality. My asexuality and my trauma were separate things. I already knew that I was ace before that happened to me. But at the same time, like, there are people who arrive at their asexuality through different roads. And, you know, for some people, that experience might change who they are and how they, you know, see their relationships and affect what they want. And I think the last thing those people would need is people gatekeeping them from a community that they want to be a part of. It's definitely tricky. You know, it's a hard one to answer, but I hope that's not too problematic. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
I actually dealt with this for a very long time. Like when I first kind of acknowledged that I was ace, because I kind of knew I was for a while before I admitted it. I was like really obsessed with knowing whether I was ace because of my trauma or my trauma occurred because I was ace. I had this real fixation with knowing the answer to that for no real reason, because I always acknowledged the validity of other people who had experienced trauma in ways, but it mattered to me. It was really important. I mean, my answer is yes. I believe that sexual trauma in particular can cause asexuality, and I believe that doesn't matter at all. But in general, no. Just because it may be the story of a person or two people or a few people, that doesn't mean that you can that invalidate their story, and it doesn't mean that you can invalidate every asexual person's story by saying, oh, all asexuals are like that. For me, where I personally came out on the issue is that what happened to me happened because I'm asexual, but my sex repulsion probably was caused by that. So I was always asexual, but maybe I'm sex repulsed because of my trauma, and I'm pretty happy with that conclusion. But I don't believe I am asexual because of my trauma, but I do believe that there are some people who are. I have met people who are, and that's entirely valid. But I also certainly wouldn't say it was the most usual situation.
Yeah, I think we should be accepting of people who get there by that road, but the last thing that we need is a monolithic statement like all asexuals are asexual because of trauma, which is objectively, that's bunk.
I certainly feel that that's not true, and it's harmful to the community at large to say that trauma causes.
Oh, definitely.
But I also feel that to this very small group of people who are asexual because they have experienced sexual trauma, a blanket no, it never ever happens is harmful to those few people. So I'd like to just add that little qualifier there that it could, for the occasional person, be true, because it is for the occasional person true.
Can I add in that there is no research to date that has ever shown that, in any kind of credible way, that any sexual orientation is caused by anything. So it is true that someone's sexuality could be flexible, could be fluid over their lifetime and can change, but sexuality doesn't change when we want it to. So I think it's for me, it's quite clear that asexuality is not caused by trauma, but obviously all kinds of trauma affect us in all kinds of ways, and we may avoid things or do things because of our history. I think somebody who chooses to be asexual because of their history is just as asexual as somebody who would say it's not their choice. So in terms of, is it valid? Are you valid if you're asexual because of trauma? Absolutely. Who's to say? There is nobody who can gatekeep and say who's valid and who's not. That's categorically not okay. But I don't think that asexuality is caused by trauma, but I think it can affect our choices in terms of how we live.
I think, I was gonna say that, sexuality is can be fluid for people, and I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. That's my dog. I'm sorry. She's gonna get in the way. I can't do anything about her. She had surgery, so she has to be with me, and she's got a cone, and she's going to be annoying. I'm so sorry.
Casey, at least show the dog.
Yeah, come on. If we're gonna, you're so cute. Yeah.
She's a sook. She's sedated.
What's her name?
Does that calm her down? No. She just wants love. Please lie down. Thank you.
Can we get a name?
Kyrie. Her name is Kyrie. If there are
She's
any
so
Kingdom Hearts fans here, she is named from Kyrie from Kingdom Hearts. I have a cat named Riku. I'm a big Kingdom Hearts fan. So now that Kyrie's stolen the show,
in some ways, I think that's good, because I feel like at some point we're going to need the emotional support dog. So it's good that Casey has provided the emotional support dog for what could be a reasonably heavy panel.
We should have a code word. If anyone in the chat says this code word, I'll just quickly show Kyrie. Calm people down.
In the chat, would like her to know she's a good girl.
Thank you.
Can I comment when Casey's finished? Can I comment as well? Just making sure that I don't get missed.
Yeah, no worries.
So Casey,
sorry for derailing the discussion. Sexuality, absolutely incredibly fluid for a lot of people, and that is something that is gatekept in in other circles, you know, if someone identifies as bi at some point and then identifies as gay, often they can be gay kept, or like, you know, in that's a random example, in any circumstance where sexuality can change over time, often people take that as invalidating either their current sexuality or their past sexuality, and that's just not how it works. For some people, sexuality can be fluid. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that asexuality itself is can be really complex, in that it's not necessarily just strictly about sexual attraction or lack of sexual attraction, because there are a lot of asexual people, even though, you know, libido is different to sexual attraction, and sexual behaviors and how you act is different again to both of those things. So someone may experience low libido and identify themselves as asexual, or no desire to act on to engage in sexual acts and consider themselves asexual. So that's kind of, there's sort of a lot more that comes into it than for typical sexualities. But again, I think we're all kind of in agreement that, yeah, you shouldn't, that should never be used to gatekeep someone. And it's, however, whatever path you take, however you get to where you get, whether you come in and out, whatever, you're valid, your journey is valid. That's really corny, I'm sorry, but I think that's the takeaway.
Gemma?
Yeah, and I guess I agree with everybody in that while trauma doesn't necessarily cause your asexuality, it can for some people in some circumstances. It's one of many things that all sorts of people go through, and it's not just aces who go through trauma that can affect the way they look at relationships and the way they interact with other people on an emotional and sexual level and things like that. But it's not the be all and end all to being ace. And I mean, I knew I was ace before some of my trauma, but not before some of the other trauma, somewhere in the middle. And I actually found out because I knew one of the administrators of Avon, and we were comparing notes about moderating. And she's like, I have admin here. And I went there and I went, you know what? That's really me. And I stayed. And it never occurred to me that it had anything to do with anything traumatic in my past. There was no connection there for me. And I know at least one, like Kate, I know some people who have had traumatic pasts that have then become ace, or have decided that they feel that they're ace, and they're just as valid as anyone who has come to their aceness in any way, whatever way they got there. I mean, and everybody is valid because everyone's experience is different. And we as asexuals can't, if we don't want other people to gatekeep us, it's a little bit hypocritical if we gatekeep other people, even if their path is different.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Gemma. Right, so we're going to move on to our next question, which is, do aces experience sexual assault and domestic violence at a higher rate than allosexual people? And what are the specific risks for ace people? So Kate, would you like to start us off?
This is going to be big.
I have a lot to say on this subject because that's what I do.
This is her specialty.
Yes, there's a study that has come out recently, which I probably should have had prepared with me, but I have had a day. A study that has come out quite recently, which has found, I think it's a UK study, Joe might know of it, that has found that asexual people experienced sexual assault at the highest rate, apart from, I think, bisexual people. Hang on, I've got another one here. Let me just look through what I have. Why doesn't somebody else talk while I look through my actual facts?
I'd love to. I think a sad truth is that a lot of people who don't understand asexuals hear I'm asexual and they think, oh, I can fix that. I know that when I'm a survivor, like a lot of people here, I'm a survivor of a sexual assault, and I can remember my abuser saying, you just haven't had good sex. And I truly believe to this day that she thought she was doing me a favor. And I think that's a sad truth for a lot of us, where this claim of asexuality or non-sexuality is taken as, because it's seen as something wrong, because we live in a society that is compulsorily sexual. So asexual isn't really an option to a lot of people who don't understand it yet. It's something that needs to be corrected. And that all comes back to this idea that in a compulsorily sexual society, it is expected that you will be sexual, you will make babies, and you will be heterosexual, and you will make babies, and how good will you be? So, Kate, did you find your statistic?
I found so many.
Hey!
I will put a link to where I got this information from later, but there's been a number of studies. One important one is the Change the Course National Report on Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment at Australian Universities, which came out in 2017. And that was a very important report in terms of discovering the horrific amounts of sexual assault at unis, which I also know a little about because I was a women's representative at my uni. But when they interviewed, the sample size is not huge, but when they interviewed students and got information from students to find out whether or not they had been experienced sexual assault on campus, they also asked them what their orientation was. So they had 19% were straight, 34% were gay, lesbian, or homosexual, 36% were bisexual, 38% were asexual, which so that if they found in general that queer students had a much, much higher rate, double what they were finding in heterosexual students. That's one study. The other one that I could find the most quickly was a study of, where is that one gone? They did a study of self-identifying as having been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and having experienced sexual trauma. So they just asked US college students, if they had post-traumatic stress and if they had sexual trauma. And they found, so they looked at non-asexual and asexual. Non-asexual participants, they found 1.9% reported PTSD and 2.4% reported a history of sexual trauma in the past 12 months. Among the group identified as asexual, 6.6% reported that they had PTSD and 3.5% reported that they'd had a history of sexual assault in the past 12 months. So those are just two of the many, many studies that there are. And some amazing human being has collected all of this information into one place. And I will link you to it now. It is phenomenal work that they have done,
Please.
not just on sexual violence, but on the oppression of asexual people in general.
It sounds awful, but important.
Yes.
Which is probably the subheading I would give this panel: awful but important.
It is an incredible just collection of research that they have put together into one place.
And this is reflected time and again in research about especially sociological research about asexual lived experiences. Because another thing to know is even we've got the beyond the point of opinion sexual assault cases, but for a lot of asexual people there's a first time where stuff just doesn't make sense because you kind of go along on rails thinking, oh yeah, this will be fine, sex will be fine, and there is a extreme amount of reports that indicate that a huge amount of asexuals go through with what they term consensual but unwanted sex, either to placate a partner or because they just genuinely don't understand that they don't want that. I know that I was one in that second category. If anyone else in the chat can relate to that moment where you kiss someone and you think, hang on, what? Why does this suck?
This is awful. Why are people into that?
Yeah, there's terminology for that. I'm loving what's happening in the chat right now. But yeah, so for a lot of asexuals, sex in itself can be traumatic because we're told again and again and again that not wanting that is not an option. It's beyond the discourse. It's not talked about. You will do this and you will want to do this. And that's hammered into us over and over. We're brainwashed. And to be someone who finds out in that moment that this isn't what you want, that in itself can be traumatic for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Can I have put to bring this.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
quite a few clients who bring us to therapy, and there's a kind of phrase that I've been working with people on. I talk to them about self-consent, because often in relationships we don't check in with ourselves in the moment. Is this something I want to do? And is this something I want to do now? Is this something I want to do with this person? Is this something I want to do today in this context? Because there is this kind of pressure that this is normal and we should be doing what's normal. And there's still a huge number of people who have never heard the word asexual, who think this is what they should be doing if they're normal students or normal young people, because they don't know that being asexual is a thing. And so I always encourage people to check in with themselves in every circumstance, and to know that consent is never permanent. Consent is for now, and can be withdrawn at any time. But we need to learn the skills and the language to check in with ourselves, so that we can genuinely, I like the phrase consensual but unwanted, which is exactly what I'm talking about. And we need to really work at this and help one another to get in the habit of checking in with ourselves, not just in terms of, do I want sex, but we can do it day in, day out. Do I want coffee? No, I don't want coffee. I'll come and sit with you, but I don't want coffee, thank you. So we check in with ourselves. What's my felt sense? What do I want right now? I think is a really, really good habit for us all to develop and to help one another with.
Right, thanks guys. So Gemma and Casey, do you have anything else you'd like to add on the subject of how, if ACEs experience sexual assault and domestic violence at a higher rate, and what the specific risks to them might be?
I do. Surprisingly, that's why we're all here. Well, I mean, I don't know the specifics the way Kate does, because this is her baby. This area is her interest area, and Kate and I have been friends for a long time. So I'm like, I leave the expertise of the statistics to Kate. But I mean, I think that, as an opinion, I think that asexuals probably do, because of things like corrective rape, and because of that the whole allosexual perspective of sex, and that it just doesn't marry up with how asexuals feel about sex, generally speaking. I mean, some obviously are interested, but
and romantically inclined asexuals like yourself and myself.
yeah. I mean, and because romantically inclined asexuals, I know that I grew up thinking that basically, you know, that when people were talking about crushes and stuff like that, that it was all the things that are come under romantic attraction, and I just assumed that everyone else was the same. And when other people didn't behave in that way, it made no sense to me, because I was just kind of like, hang on, what the hell are you doing? Like the conversations that people have about it, and the way that people who are not asexual discuss sex can be quite traumatic for asexuals, because it's such a dissonance between how we feel about what we grow up understanding that everyone else does, and then we realize, hang on, no, we're the ones that have it, that aren't, we're missing the bit that they're obviously getting at when they're talking about relationships. And what they see and what we see aren't the same thing, and it does your head in a little bit, because you just, hang on, that's what they're talking about? Are you serious? Oh, and like, I mean, I just kind of go, really? Oh. But I mean, when it comes to assault and stuff, I mean, I know that my ex-partner, like multiple ex-partners of mine, probably got coercive consent for one reason or another. I mean, I had one ex who tried to bribe me to sleep with him because I needed medication and he worked in a pharmacy, and he basically went, hey, if you do this, I'll do this for you, and here, have the meds. And I didn't feel like I had a choice because I needed them, you know, and that was totally fine in his book. And I mean, another example is that in a relationship with a partner, the assumption that you are supposed to have sex with them, and that when you don't want to, any compromising you do is considered, you know, like I felt any compromising that I did was coerced, because I didn't want to have any of it. And, you know, and I'm just like, and everything I gave was never enough to give into what they wanted. And it's, you know, and it's comes out of that sexual coercion, because, you know, it's not, you know, I didn't say no, and then they did it anyway. It was not done, and I felt like for a long time that it didn't fall under that category of assault and that kind of thing, but apparently it does, because it's really not okay.
Yeah, and it's because, like, you know, sex is seen as this baseline need.
Oh, absolutely.
That, like, shitty little people can do shitty little things like that and not realize that they're being a sicko. Because of course of course this is okay, because what's not okay is that you're not putting out. And
completely.
It's so messy and messed up.
And you're lucky, you know, you're an asexual, and you're lucky that they would even, you know, want to be in a relationship with you. So
oh god, exactly.
you definitely should be compromising, you know.
Oh, of course, you know, like, and I mean,
they're more likely to be, you know, domestic violence or sexual assault situation.
It's funny how those compromises always run in one direction, don't they? They always run in the direction of
100%.
You need to compromise, you need to put out. It's never the other way, that they need to compromise and not want it from you.
And I mean, and to top it off, I even offered going to get sex elsewhere. Like, I gave them the option, and they went, "Oh no, I'm with you. I want to have sex with you." And then on top of that, they policed your emotions and go, "Well, you're supposed to like it as much as I do because I want to feel attractive from you." And it's just like, but I don't feel that, you know. And it just,
that's common. Like, you have no business looking bored, you know, like you have to.
No, God, no.
You have to be enjoying it as well, which is like
putting in all the effort when it's like, but that's not how I feel about it, you know. Like, you're lucky. I feel like silly, like you say, you're lucky that I'm even compromising for you. Like, you know, I'm even putting myself in this position that I don't want to be in because it's you. And, you know, and it's never enough.
I feel like there's from people telling me that kind of story where, like, you have to enjoy me having sex with you as well. Like, I feel like there might be something that's really coming from a partner seeing asexuality as a personal attack on them. They really take
absolutely.
They really take quite personally that you're asexual. And I think that might be quite a common situation.
Casey, do you have anything to add on the subject of specific risks to the ace community about sexual violence and domestic violence?
Yes. So I think, basically very similar to kind of what's been said already, but also I saw a comment in the chat that said something like asexuality needs to be taught in order to properly understand consent. And I think that is a hugely important point. And like, that certainly resonated with me because that really aligns with my experience of asexuality and trauma and sexual assault, which, you know, because we've been talking, all of us in a group chat prior to this panel, so we all know a little bit about each other's stories. And I think my story was a little bit different to a lot of the others because I was not someone who knew that I was ace. I didn't find out, I didn't realize that I was ace until I was already an adult and had already been in sexual relationships and stuff like that. And I was actually the opposite, as I thought that I was a very sexual person because I knew that I experienced attraction, and I experienced attraction a lot and really strongly. I experienced aesthetic attraction and sensual attraction. So I knew that people were pretty and I wanted to kiss their faces or maybe like hug them. I don't know. I thought that would be cool, but I didn't understand that there were different types of attraction. It's only ever really taught that, you know, there is sexual attraction, like that is what attraction is. So I assumed that meant I'm sexually attracted to these people, I'm a sexual person, I want to have sex. And I didn't know that asexuality existed. I never had that language. I didn't know that there were different types of attractions. I didn't know enough about consent. I didn't know that if I was in a relationship with someone, I was allowed to not to want to have sex with them, because like Mel was saying, it's that compulsory like sexuality, not even compulsory heterosexuality, but just the idea that everyone wants sex and you can't not want sex. and that you know, I knew that if I didn't want sex with someone that I was not in a relationship with, I was allowed to say no to that. But I didn't know that I could say no to my partner, because, you know, that's we were in a monogamous relationship. Like I had to. And so yeah, like that was kind of my experience with this lack of education, and then getting into this relationship where I thought that I wanted sex, and so it started out with that consensual but unwanted kind of territory. And then as I started realizing that no, I don't actually like this, and I don't actually want this, but then I was not allowed to say no at first, because of myself, because of the education putting barriers on myself. But then I also experienced that kind of coerciveness of, you know, my partner, you know, the same thing, also said, you know, we were in a monogamous relationship, and I also brought up the idea of polyamory, and he was absolutely against that. Absolutely no way, could never do that. I'm in a relationship with you, therefore I only want to have sex with you, but I want to have sex, and sex is a need. And to the point where, like, he would try to make it seem like I thought that I was being abusive if I didn't have sex with him, because it was like I was depriving him of something that he needed. Like, you know, don't worry about the fact that it was really damaging me.
Of course not.
You know, like the way that I felt and how uncomfortable it made me. It's like, no, I'm depriving him of his need. And you see that in media as well. Like, that's such a common thing of, like, you know, typically it's like, women will pretend to have a headache. You know, I've seen posts about, you know, female privilege is being able to pretend you have a headache to get out of sex and things like that. It's that kind of like, and the people like withholding sex to punish their partner and things like that. Like, it's so prevalent everywhere, in media, in our education, in everything. It's just kind of this overwhelming idea that no one even really like sees or acknowledges. Like, it's that until you, like, you don't see it until you see it, you know. So yeah, it was just that kind of that's my very roundabout way of saying, yes, absolutely, asexual people are more vulnerable to sexual assault, and it's because of things like a lack of education about asexuality, a lack of representation for non-sexual relationships, and a lack of education about like general consent and what that looks like as well.
So sticking with that topic then, can you all talk a bit about what you think makes consent? What does consent consist of?
Oof. Joe, did you have something to say? I thought I saw your hand come up.
Bad. And now it's gone because we moved on to the next question you asked.
Okay, never mind. It's gone. It's gone now.
Risk for asexual people. I think there is something also in that some asexual people don't read other people's language to them, don't read body language, don't read the signs, so to speak. Several of us have said we think we were assaulted because we're asexual, and I certainly think that's true for me, in that I can see two people flirting with each other, but I don't perceive anyone flirting with me. So I have a blind spot when it comes to certain kind of generally accepted things that people do in society. And I think for some of us as asexuals, not everyone, but for some of us as asexuals, because we don't read the signs, we find ourselves in perhaps more difficult situations than other people do. Just wanted to add that in.
Oh, can I add in a really funny anecdote just
Please.
to lighten it up?
Yeah,
Just really
definitely.
quickly on that note, because that I was just reminded. I think that's really funny, Joe, because I actually have the opposite response where I think that everyone is flirting with me
Same.
always.
Same.
Yeah.
Yes,
and it's not like so it's not like I don't think I'm like so beautiful and attractive that everyone's like automatically attracted to me or whatever. But it's just that it goes into that kind of like not being able to read the situation, and like I have no idea what flirting is. I don't understand. I'm someone who's told often that I'm flirting with others, and like that I'm really flirtatious, and I'll talk to someone and we'll joke and I'll laugh, and then someone will come up to me and be like, "Ooh, you were flirting with them all night," and all this stuff, and I was like,
You're like,
"What?
what?
I thought we were
News
just
to
having a
me.
conversation."
Yeah,
But my
exactly.
really my funny little anecdote was I actually had this experience with a person where I was talking and hanging out with them for a long time, and I thought that they were into me and that they were trying to like date me or hit on me or something, and I was like really worried because I was like, oh, like I really like you as a friend, but I'm just worried that you're just trying to like, you know, hit on me, and I don't want to give you the wrong idea or whatever.
Did they think the same thing?
Turns out they're also asexual, and so I brought up with them one night. We were both drunk, drinking morning alcohol. Sorry, but yeah, we were both drunk, and I was like, I think I just like straight up said like, "You don't like me, do you?" And they were like, "Oh gosh, no!" And then we were both like, "Oh, thank gosh!"
Oh, that's brilliant.
But anyway,
Sorry,
I
can
used
I
to
add
have
one
that same
tiny
thing.
little thing? Sorry.
I used to have
Go
the same
ahead,
thing
Gemma.
at school, or but like in high school, my friends would all be like, "Oh, that boy's really into you. He flirts with you," and I'd be like, "You guys are straight tripping. Like he has never spoken to me." like, oh, but the way he looks at you, and I'm just like, "What are you
He
talking?"
looks at me with his eyeballs. How does he look at you?
What is wrong with you? I don't understand what is happening in your head. You are what? And I would just not understand. And now I know that I'm asexual. And I talked to my best friend from the time, is still my best friend, and she's like, it makes so much sense now that you. And I'm like, I still think you would. Like, he was way above me popularity level. There was nothing happening there, and it was not because I'm asexual.
Gemma, were you saying something?
So, I wanted to. I agree completely with Kate about completely missing that stuff because, like, I went to an all-girls school, and the amount of times that people, we'd be at dance, school things with other schools and stuff, and they'd be like, oh, and I'd be like, no, what are you talking about? But the thing that I wanted to say was something to do with what KC was saying, and about the thinking that you wanted the sex when you didn't actually want it. And I know that I used to self-identify as Grey/Demi because of that factor. And it wasn't until I left my partner that I actually sat down and thought about it and went, you know what? Yeah, it's not really the case. And I mean, I always had to placate him into thinking that I kind of maybe did a little bit, just because otherwise the argument was just not worth it. But I mean, like that, I don't use Demi anymore because I thought I was Demi because the emotional connection there, and I thought, oh well, I must like it on some level because otherwise I wouldn't go along with it. But that's not the case.
So has anyone else would like to share something about their ideas around consent and what it means?
Yeah, I think in some ways consent can be a bit harder when you're ace, I think, because there's a lot more confusion, and it's a lot more difficult, at least in my experience, to answer the question of, do I want this? For instance, like when I was assaulted, so without going into too much detail, I don't want to make it triggering, but I was in a situation where I had no other choice, and I had to find a way to make myself be okay with it. And the thing I told myself in my head, knowing that I had no choice, to make it okay, I told myself, what does it matter if you don't want it? You're asexual anyway. This doesn't really count. You wouldn't have wanted it anyway. It's all the same. And that, it's a horrible thing to think, and it took me years to kind of unpick that thought and realize why it was so bad. But that was the kind of coping mechanism I used. And when I tell people that, ace people are normally like, I know what you mean. That idea of like, what does it matter if I don't want this? I don't want any of it. Does it really count? So I think there's a lot of ways where consent is just a little bit harder to kind of diagnose and understand when you're ace. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Val. Would one of our other panelists have anything they'd like to add there?
I think consent is really hard to obtain when you yourself are not sure if you're consenting. And I know that I have initiated sex that I didn't want to have. And I've done it because I've been manipulated into doing it. But you know, like legally I wouldn't have a leg to stand on. But I mean, you know, it would be difficult to argue that consent wasn't there when I was the one initiating. But on the other hand, I would throw up. So, you know, my partner had to know, you know, if I threw up every time, they had to know that I didn't really want to, even if I was initiating it. But I mean, technically, I was consenting. But I don't want to have sex with anyone, but I wouldn't want to have sex with someone who threw up afterwards like that.
Oh God, no.
Yeah, that's not sexy. But
I know a lot of the times, like, this onus is placed on us to say, no, I don't want this. But there's no onus on the other person to understand when their partner or the person they're with is saying one thing but clearly feeling another. Like, you know, with mine in particular, it was like, how could she not know that I didn't want that? Like, the way that I was responding. And I think there should be a lot more, like, I don't know, responsibility from the other side as well. Shouldn't all be down to the person to say, hang on, stop, I'm not sure. Sometimes you're so not sure that you can't say anything. And what about that is sexy? Like, what about that would make you want to keep going? I don't know. I feel like there's a point where these people should really look in the mirror.
Oh, I completely agree with you, Mel. I mean, it's one thing to say, to outright and say, no, I don't want this. But when lines are blurred and there is coercion involved or other factors in there, and the assumption is that, you know, compulsory sexuality, that everyone's going to want it, that when you're trying, people have only really, like the last 10, 15 years have really only gone that rape is not just when you say no. There is other things in there that are now being considered to be rape, even if the sex still occurs and it's not just no, and, you know, there's violence involved. They're including other ways of that occurring. Basically, you know, if you don't clearly say yes, it's still considered assault and rape, even if you kind of say yes or you sort of say no, you know, like, and I mean, partners, I mean, I know multiple exes of mine had this attitude of like, oh, you know, we'll just get into things, you know, and it's like, I'm not saying no because I'm trying to be coy. I'm not trying to give you, like, you know, I'm not trying to say I don't feel like it because I'm playing this game with you. You know, I'm telling you I don't really want to. And then it's just like, well, it's what's expected. So let's go, you know, like, I mean, and like Kate, I've initiated sex I didn't want because it was easier than having an argument or having to deal with the, you know, emotional abuse from the person.
Can I add something as well? I'd like to advocate for us expanding the concept of consent into every area of life. Like I mentioned earlier about, do I want coffee? No, I don't want coffee. But for example, when we have friends, how often do we go and see a friend and we say something like, you never guess what happened to me today, and we download this great big story without asking them, do you have the headspace? Can I share a story with you? And I think if we were able to do that, we would get much more used to considering the other, because it's a failure. Lack of consent is also a failure of empathy. All of us in all of our relationships, practicing empathy and practicing consent, then we learn the language for, is this okay with you? You know, just as a normal thing, rather than, can we have sex? I want to have sex. I'm going to have sex. Do you know what I mean? It becomes much more something that we just do in our relationships. We do in our family, in our work relationships. I think it's a really important thing that we develop those skills, both for ourselves and in listening to others. So I would like to see consent taught and practiced. I was just going to comment in the thing about
it got me too.
Yeah.
I want sex. Let's do it.
Consent needs to be active, but I think it's part of empathy as well. Trying to see how the other person is seeing the world. And if we all got more practice with those things, then consent would be much more accessible to us. And I come back to my thing, I have to check in with myself first before I can consent to something. And as human beings, we don't do that. We're taught, we're socialized as children, as young people. We go to school without anyone asking our consent to be present in school. We're taught, we sit in classes and no one says, are you okay sitting here? Do you want to be here? We're taught that consent is not required. And I think if we could teach ourselves and we could train one another and encourage and urge one another on, that as adults, we can take more responsibility. We can say yes and no and get used to the language that we need to do that, to negotiate that.
That's a really good point. I mean, the consenting in a relationship is just generally people don't bother because the assumption is that everybody wants it and nobody bothers to consent and everyone just falls into bed together kind of thing, and nobody actually asks, even in a allosexual relationship. They generally don't. I mean, if they're introducing things that are a little bit outside the norm, like kinks and also BDSM and stuff like that, yeah, they have better language and better understanding of using consent. But just a straight cis het relationship is just the assumption is consent's not needed. Even if I spoke to a friend of mine who is cis het, and I brought up something that bothered me in a relationship, and she just kind of went, oh, well, even if that happened, I'd still have sex with them. And I'm like, really? And she's like, well, yeah, and it's just what you do. And I'm like, not really, sweetheart.
It always makes me so uncomfortable in shows. Like, there's this one scene in Game of Thrones.
Oh God, which scene? There's lots of scenes.
Okay, it's where Grey Worm and Missandei do it, and I hate that damn scene because they don't say anything. They just go for it, and the whole time I'm there like, does he actually want this? Like, what about this? I don't. And they just don't say a word. They just kind of go for it, and it's just the most uncomfortable thing because it's unclear whether or not they are actually consenting, even in the scene, even though they're doing it. And yeah, it's really weird to suddenly realize that that's not just in the shows. That's what life is like for people who feel those things. Maybe it sounds like a made-up myth. To me, I don't know.
We are so socialized to do what we're told to do that we don't question it. Since we're tiny, go and tidy your bedroom. I don't really want to. Well, tough, you go and tidy your bedroom.
I'm guilty of that with my child.
I think it's a good opportunity for those of us who are parents to practice something different with our children.
I don't have trying.
to ask consent. I used to, with my nephew and niece when they're twins, when they were small. I used to play tickling games, of course, and my niece always screamed, "No, stop!" And I would stop, and I would say to her, do you really want me to stop, or do you really want me to carry on? And she'd giggle and say, carry on. I said, are you sure? Carry on. And we can with things as simple as that to kind of get used to. We have to ask consent from one another, and we have to learn how we can give consent. Sorry, I'm going to shut up.
No.
Thanks,
that was good.
Yeah. Casey, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, an actual proper commentary on consent, not just a fun little anecdote. Yeah, no, absolutely, Joe. I so wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. And I think for me, because you'll probably see in this panel, like, education is kind of like my big thing. Like, I am it's my thing that I'm focused on, that I'm trying to change to make better, because it's kind of shit at the moment. There's lots of things that are shit at the moment. Education is the hill I'm going to die on. But there are 3 things that I learned about consent that really changed the way that I viewed consent and understood consent, that I want to be taught in schools. So the first is the traffic light system and the use of safety words. So the traffic light system is green light, amber light, red light, and to practice using this in sexual situations, but also just in all situations. And so the way that I have practiced this in relationships is to have a word. I've never really used the amber word. I have a green light word and a red light word. So green light is, yes, everything is good, let's keep going. Red light is, no, we need to stop. Amber light means, I'm not sure about this. So generally in like a sexual situation, if you're at amber light, if you're maybe involved in something and you've got the green light, and then maybe you're trying to move forward into something else and you get the amber light, it's like, okay, let's maybe just, I'm not sure how I feel about this, let's pause for a little bit, let's stay where we are, let's not move forward with anything, and let me kind of test the water. And that's like, that is the other thing that I think is really important about consent, which is actually my second point. I talk in circles, I'm sorry, I have ADHD. So my second point is enthusiastic consent, and I'll talk about that when I actually get to my second point. But so yeah, that's the traffic light systems of having the stop, maybe, hold up, stop, maybe, go. I'm asexual, can you tell? My traffic lights are all red. And with that being safety words, so like I said, I have a word for green light. So for example, my green light word is pumpkin, and it's an easy way for me to like check in with someone. So rather than saying like, is this okay? Are you okay with this? Does this feel good? Are you happy for me to continue? Sometimes that can be really hard for many reasons. And whatever. Sometimes it's just easier to have an understood word like pumpkin, and then the person can say, yes, pumpkin. And so I get that green light and keep going. And it's the same in reverse. Obviously, they check in with me. I can say pumpkin. It's a really easy way. And the same with like stop. So my stop word usually is pineapple. So again, sometimes it's hard to say no, to say I don't like this, to say please stop. So it's a lot easier to say pineapple, and they're like, okay, cool. And I think safety words are often, they're a big thing in BDSM, and a very important thing in BDSM, but people don't realize that they can be used outside of BDSM, and also that they can be used outside of sex. Like I use safety words in everyday situations, particularly as someone with PTSD. If there is a topic that is particularly triggering to me, I use safety words to say, please stop talking about this. And I think that goes into what Joe was saying, is like bringing that consent into everyday sexual situations. Like consent is not just about sex. Like everything we do requires consent. So that's, I'm a big fan of safety words. So that's my first point. My second point is in like consent has to be enthusiastic. So that's just the general idea of, you know, if it's a maybe, or I'm not sure, or I don't know how I feel about this, you haven't received consent. And so if that's what you're receiving from someone, then you need to stop and you need to put the brakes on and you need to assess the situation. And if then they're like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, I've decided I'm okay with this, let's keep going, then you can keep going. But yeah, and I think there's been a couple comments in the chats as well that have said, you know, a maybe is not consent and not sure is not consent. And that's the same as well with things like, because it's this idea that no means no, but what needs to be taught is that anything other than an enthusiastic yes is not consent. Because then that goes into things again like freezing up. Freezing up is not consent. And also being aware of when people can't give consent, because again, like I've been in a lot of situations where I have been very, very drunk and I have initiated sex as someone who is incredibly intoxicated, and I for a very long time never considered that to be traumatic or never considered that to be non-consensual, because even though I was really drunk, I never woke up and regretted it. And I thought that was the qualifier. It's like, well, I didn't, like, sure, I wouldn't have done that if I wasn't drunk, but I didn't regret it. So it wasn't sexual assault. That's not how that works. That was totally sexual assault. People don't realize that someone who is intoxicated cannot give consent. And that is something that is really concerning, because that is, again, something that is really, really prevalent in a lot. Like, how many shows do we watch that where like the first step in someone getting their sexy times on is to like bring out a bottle of vodka or whatever. It's like, yeah, or like talking about like specifically giving alcohol to people to loosen them up and things like that. Like, it's just such a large part of our culture that alcohol and sex go hand in hand, and people don't like genuinely don't know and don't understand that an intoxicated person can't give consent. That's incredibly worrying. And there was a third point that I had. The third point being that there's no such thing as blanket consent. So consent can be taken away at any time. And that's, again, where it becomes really important to be checking in with your partner during anything, even if it's not explicitly sexual, always checking in. And yeah, and just understanding that just because you have a yes, if someone then turns around and says no, you can't keep going. You need to stop. Like that, there's no such thing as like it's a consent. Or saying yes once doesn't mean that it can happen at any time. Or, you know, saying yes and then getting really drunk doesn't mean you keep going. And I think those are the three really important consent things that I wish were sort of in mainstream education.
Cool. Thanks, Casey. Right. So we're going to move on to our next question now. So as ACEs who have survived trauma, do you feel supported by the community, and what can the community do to support you more? So talking about the ACE community there.
Most of the time, I do feel supported. I certainly like my local group of ACEs in the ACT are the most amazing, supportive, fabulous group. Shout out to you all. Hello. But I have experienced and obviously the ACEs organising Aussie Ace Week with me have been very supportive and awesome. But I have been in ACE spaces where it has been a little bit like, I guess, can you not talk about that? I guess I feel like it's, and I've talked to other trauma surviving ACEs about this. There's a little bit like this understandable thing where ACE people, we want to get rid of this stereotype that you know, all ACEs are survivors of trauma. And of course that's not a stereotype that is helpful or that we would like, but it does mean that those of us who are survivors are sometimes kind of silenced a little, or you know, we're inconvenient. So can you kind of keep that on the hush, because you are perpetuating this stereotype that we are trying to get rid of. And when you talk about it publicly, you are, you know, undoing the good work that we're trying to do. And so I have been criticized for talking publicly about being a survivor, and basically told, can I shut up? It's not helpful. So yes, that is a thing that I have experienced. Can I kind of be less loud? So I guess I would say what ACEs can do to be more supportive of survivors is to give us space to talk. And yeah, that's a really not helpful attitude at all. we need to talk.
See, my thoughts more or less align with yours. Like, I've heard, especially because I work in representation, in like the YA representation field, and I've heard a few times things like, I'm tired of seeing asexual characters that have sexual assault in their background, which is very difficult to hear when you are an asexual character with trauma in your background. So it's like, on the one hand, I understand, like, it should not be communicated that all ACEs are traumatized, but at the same time, be a bit more self-aware of what you're saying and just how many of us will be hurt by hearing that. And this kind of circles back to what we were talking about right at the start about whether ACEs, you know, are traumatized, and end of the day, some of us are, and it's a lot more than we'd like, and it's a lot more than you'd think. So,
yeah, and you know, that's a really small group. We don't really need to have, you know, we don't really need a panel for that, or we don't really need a a discussion about like that is not a really small group. That is a very
No.
big.
Yeah.
You are very wrong if you think that is a small group.
And I mean, Kate, that's one of the reasons that this panel came up, is because it's something that needed to be said, and it's something that needs to be discussed, even though we are trying to get rid of the stereotype that trauma causes asexuality. It still does occur to ACEs, particularly parallel to their asexuality, not necessarily as a cause, but because of their asexuality, like Kate said earlier as well, because it's ACEs see the sexual stuff, not all ACEs, but some, like we see the sexual stuff from a different perspective, and what we would consider traumatic might not necessarily be that for an allosexual, but it's still traumatic for us.
What happened to me happened because I'm asexual. What happened to me was corrective assault, an attempt to fix me repeatedly, by assaulting me. And so me being quiet about that doesn't help at all.
No.
And be extremely loud about that to say that was unacceptable. And that happened many years ago, 15 years ago, whatever. And I go and I speak to young ACE people who tell me that they've experienced exactly the same thing. Nothing has changed. And that is unacceptable. And I need to talk about it. And if I'm not allowed to talk about it, then, 15 years time, young people are still going to be having the same experience that I had.
And no one needs to go through that. Nobody should have to go through that ever. Like, it's completely unacceptable that that's seen as okay because they see asexuality as a problem.
Yeah.
I think there's this tendency sometimes in ACE spaces to think about this idea of maybe like capital T, capital A, the asexual. And there's this imaginary big idea, and that's the public idea of what an asexual person is. And we're so busy trying to protect that image from what the allos are going to think of us that maybe we forget about each other. And saying things like, oh, we can't afford to have this be an association is sort of like, man, that's a kick in the nads when it's happened to you. So I don't know, maybe, I guess my advice would just be like, be more supportive of each other. Like maybe don't care so much, or, still care about what the public think, but just, put yourselves first. We have these safe spaces for a reason. It's so we can talk to each other in private and keep that separate from, the gatekeepers and the onlookers. So utilize that resource to the best of your ability.
Thanks, Mel. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
Not a huge.
Sorry, my bad.
Being older and being a therapist, it's not actually easy for me to be part of an ACE community because a number of my clients are part of the local ACE meetup group when we could meet up. And because I'm involved, there'll be a kind of crossing of boundaries if I join socially the same group that they're part of. And as an older person, most ACE groups are younger people. I mean, I'm in my late 50s. So while there are older asexual people out there, socially, it's not a space that I would necessarily relate to in terms of looking for support. So my experience has been different, but I didn't come out as asexual into my late 40s. So, I don't have, I don't have that experience.
Casey, is there anything you'd like to add?
Not particularly, if I'm honest. I'm someone who has been incredibly privileged to have a very strong support network around me, and have specifically built up people around me who are just good beans, really. Shout out to the good beans in my life. I know you're in the chat. I see you. So like from a personal perspective, I think I've been, really lucky in that regard. Thank you, Liam. And also, I have also had the privilege to be able to really consider when and where I talk about these things. So, knowing that I can come on this panel and that I'm specifically here to talk about trauma and asexuality, and that's probably going to be quite well received, and there weren't really any barriers for me in terms of safety or security to coming on this panel, and being in other positions like that as well, where you know, I've really, I have ownership over my story, so I tell it in places that I know where it's gonna be used to empower. I don't like using the word empower. I have feelings about that word, but that it's gonna be used in that sense, and that people are gonna see it who need to see it. And I don't want young asexual people to be exposed to me telling my story and then a bunch of people telling me that I'm invalid and all of that. You know, I want to be that person that gives validation, that allows people to be supported in the way that I have been supported myself. So yeah, I'm really lucky in that regard, but I definitely know that that's not the case for everyone.
Thanks, Casey. Right, a question for Joe now. Joe, could you explain what trauma does to the brain and how that affects the way someone thinks?
Gosh,
Just the easy stuff, Joe. Just the easy stuff.
I'm not a trauma specialist, I want to say that. Trauma is different to just difficult experiences. And I think the main sense of trauma is something which overwhelms what they call the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is when you're driving your car and the person in front of you brakes suddenly, you respond to them braking by braking, and your heart races for a second, whew, and then you breathe and it's over. And that it's that capacity of the brain to respond to what has just happened that becomes overwhelmed. So that's what trauma is about. We have an autonomic nervous system. There's some of you will probably know this anyway. The sympathetic nervous system is the bit of our system which kicks in those circumstances. So we get adrenaline, we get cortisol, the stress hormones released in our bodies, which primes our system to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. We know the 4 Fs of how we respond to traumatic situations. And then when we recognize that the trauma, that the danger has passed, our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and down dials everything again. So our bodies have this surge of stuff going through it, and somehow we have to dissipate that. So that's what happens with trauma. It overwhelms our capacity to cope. Someone's supposed to put in the chat: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fawn is one that we often talk about these days, recognized as a trauma response, where we say yes to what, okay, that's fine, and we kind of become more conciliatory and we become compliant to the person or the threat towards us. So fight is, I'm going to fight back. Flight, I'm going to run away. Freeze, I'm going to play dead because no predator wants to eat dead meat in case it's diseased. And fawn, I'm going to kind of cope with this situation by saying yes to you. So how does trauma affect the brain? Because it overwhelms our capacity to cope, we then need to be able to look at and dissect. So what just happened? How has my view of the world changed? How has my body just changed? How has my perception of myself just changed? And so therapy can work by helping us tell our story in a way that helps our brain dissect the new information, what's just happened to me. And our brains then know how to store it as memory. If we can make a coherent story out of it, that helps us process it. So it's both bodily and cognitive, the things that we need to do with trauma. That's really kind of simplified, but is that answering your question?
Thanks, Joe. Okay, so we've got one final question and we're going to start with Joe again, but everyone's going to be answering. What advice do you have about finding an ACE-friendly mental health provider?
Okay, so I think I sent to Kate, is this right, Kate? Did you get it? Mm-hmm. A document which I don't have in my hands right now, but I could call up if you want to see it, which Kate was going to adapt for your context in Australia, because it was UK specific. But it was a list of questions, the kind of things you might want to ask somebody. The most significant thing when you're looking for a new therapist is to feel comfortable talking to them, and they need to be ACE competent. And sadly, most therapists are not ACE competent. In the UK now, it is required, although not effective, that therapists should be. So what you want to do is, when you're looking for a therapist, is give them a call, email them, and ask them specific questions about how they might respond if you told them that you didn't experience sexual attraction, and so on. So Kate has this list. Kate, how are you going to?
I'm going to put it on the Discord, and then I'll put it on Facebook as well. So on the Aussie Acebook Facebook page, and I'm also putting it in the Trauma and Asexuality Discord channel now.
Brilliant, thank you. So it's 2 sides of A4. Feel free to print it off, use it. You may not find all the questions relevant for you, but you may find some of them as being relevant and helpful. But you don't have to go with the first therapist you find. It's really important, your relationship, that you feel comfortable talking to your therapist, because if you don't, you're just going to clam up. It's not going to work. So the questions on there might help you think through what you want to ask before you employ someone as your therapist. Yeah.
Thanks, Jo. Kate, would you like to give any advice you'd have for finding a ACE-friendly mental health provider?
I actually do the same thing as I do when finding any medical provider. Is one of the first things I do is tell them that I'm asexual, because I've had doctors before whose response is to immediately tell me that they can try and cure me or try and put me on this medication or take me off that medication, and then I just immediately fire them. Because I have lived in, I guess I've always been in a position where I've been able to change doctors or psychologists or whatever. It's not always possible for you to do that, but any place, I always remind people that a doctor or a therapist or whatever, they're actually working for you. You're employing them, or perhaps Medicare is employing them on your behalf, but whatever it is, you don't have to stick with them. You don't have to do as they tell you. If you don't like the job they're doing, you can fire them and find somewhere else to go, if possible, in the area that you live in. That would be my advice. Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. Gemma, do you have any advice you'd like to offer?
I'd probably echo Kate. I have a psychologist that I've had since 2002, and while she isn't she doesn't know a lot about asexuality, anytime I've ever brought it up, it's never been an issue. She's never tried to get me to change or say you need to try this or whatever. She's just, a lot of my experience with telling people has actually been, it's kind of been hushed, and so it didn't bother her in any shape or form. And it's not something I bring up a lot when I do speak to her. But if you were trying to find somebody who's supportive, you need to know what you want from them, because as Kate said, that you are employing them and you're putting it in your hard-earned cash, particularly with a psychologist or psychiatrist. You're paying for that, because a lot of those are out of pocket, and you have to be happy and comfortable with them. And I mean, it would suck to have to do Asexuality 101 over and over and over again, and it does suck to have to do that, particularly with a medical professional or allied health. But sometimes you've got to go hunting for a good person. And I mean, I'm unlike Kate, I don't tell a lot of my allied health or my medical people about that, mainly because I like the treatment I'm getting from them, and I don't want to have to change because I've had them for a very long time. So I don't have as good of advice as Kate is fire them, you pay for them. But I mean, if you're looking for somebody, you need to have an idea of what you want them to do for you, whether you want to talk about your asexuality or not. And if you don't want to talk about it, then at least make sure that they're comfortable with you mentioning it, and they're not going to jump on you and go, oh, that's the reason for everything, or that's you know, and trying to medicalize it or turn around and call, like I've seen some people comment that they're blaming their asexuality on being on this autism spectrum, or vice versa. And, you know, that they're obviously asexual. And I mean, I know they often medical professionals try to blame it on SSRIs and other psychotropic medication. And so it's going in there with the language to be able to ask the right questions so that you get the information and the stuff that you need is really important.
Can I just add, even if you don't want to talk about asexuality, it's still worth having an ace competent therapist.
Oh,
because
I agree.
As to who you are. And you don't want them to kind of go, oh, you're asexual. Oh, and then suddenly for them to make that the thing that you're all talking about when it wasn't what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I have that with doctors a lot.
Mel, is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I've had to tell my psychologist, like, mate, you are barking up the wrong tree. You know, you'll be like, have you considered that you're depressed because of your sexuality? I'm like, no, fool. Like, let's drop that right then and there because you are bang out of line. So I've gotten very good at just like telling him off when he's wrong. I've managed to overcome one hurdle. I've gotten a really good GP. I still haven't quite managed to find the golden psychologist. That's probably the next challenge of my life. But yeah, I don't have anything really to add. I think we've covered all the bases. I think Joe's advice is really good advice, and I'm looking forward to seeing that document.
Me too.
I didn't write it, it's adapted from something else, but I think it's really useful and it's used with permission. So yeah. Can I add, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a psychotherapist, which in the UK language is different. Just to make that clear. And I put my email address as my name on my my picture there, if anybody wants to email with a question or something.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Right. Casey, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think again, I wouldn't say I've necessarily found the answer to that. I wouldn't say I've really had experience of seeing a mental health professional who is ACE competent. I'm lucky enough that I have a really good therapist at the moment, and I've been able to you know, mention the fact that I'm asexual, and it's kind of like it's not a thing because it's a thing, it's an important thing, but it's not something that I feel the need to focus on in sessions, but it's important context for my therapist to have, and I think they understand that really well. So it was really easy. Yeah, it was really easy for me to be like, I'm asexual, and I've talked about some of my sexual trauma in the therapy sessions as well. So like that's really lucky. My problem is when it comes to intersectionality, and at the moment, like for actually many years, trying to find not just a therapist or a psychologist, but a psychiatrist as well, who understands, like they need to have at least base knowledge of asexuality and, you know, the fact that I'm non-binary and sexual assault and family violence and trauma, and, you know, I'm also neurodiverse and I've chronic illness, and like all of these things, all of these different things, as well as like what I'm actually there to see them and talk about. And it's like they need to be able to hold all of this context and understand how it interacts with me, how it interacts with what I'm experiencing, and why it's important, but then not try to sort of fixate on one or assume that one caused another. Again, with like Artemis's example of psychologists being like, oh yes, you're autistic because you're ace, or you're ace because you're autistic, or you're non-binary because you're autistic, and, you know, whatever. They like to think that one points to another, and can't kind of comprehend that a person can be many things at once. And so that's something that I'm still trying to navigate that I haven't really found a good way of ensuring that I'm getting that healthcare, except by just constantly yelling at mental health professionals from a professional standpoint, doing research and actually trying to advocate in that field and try to change the way that our systems are currently functioning. That's the other hill that I'm dying on. There's the education hill and then the mental health hill. Got 1 foot on each and I will die there.
It's the valley between the hills.
They're good hills to die on, though. They're good hills to die on, Casey.
That or you've
Thank
got
you.
very long legs.
I'm 4'9", so that's absolutely not true. My legs are tiny.
All right, so that was our final question. Okay, so thank you to everyone who's attended today and tonight, and thank you to our panelists, all of you, for sharing your experiences. So everyone who's attended and everyone of panelists as well, you're welcome to attend the later sessions through the week, and please provide any feedback or comments to the Oz Ace Week Facebook page. If anyone needs support after this, you can contact Lifeline or QLife. QLife is an LGBTQIA+ service, and the people there are aware of the asexual community. So I'm going to put those numbers provided in the chat now. Casey, is there any chance your dog would like to make a recurrent appearance?
Absolutely, she loves
Please.
the attention.
She's so cute. She's so cute.
She's looking into my soul.
I know. I'm glad we have our supportive Paparino.
All those noises. Ah! Please tell her she's a good girl.
She is a very good girl.
Harry, you're a good
And
girl. You're a good girl. I love you.
Oh!
You can tell
My
we're all a
God,
little bit partial to dogs. Yes. Aces love dogs.
All cats. Cats and dogs.
Thank you all so much
Good girl,
for
good boy.
attending.
Thank
This
you,
has been
everyone.
really amazing, and it's been so
It
cool
has.
seeing so much activity in the chat and knowing everyone's been super invested and, you know, a lot of people have been saying things like, that's so interesting, I never knew that, and that's really nice to see.
We have proved the value of a panel on trauma.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
the panel on trauma had the highest number of tickets sold at this point. So our media and our research panels did pretty good, but this one got into the low 80s of tickets sold. So we probably didn't have that number of people watching, but it still beat research, which got a really big surge just after media. But yeah, so I mean, I'm keeping an eye on those things. So there, we've got the Ask an Ace, so we've got our trivia, and we've got our spooky night, but we've also got relationships panel tomorrow night, so that'll be fun.
Yes, at 7 p.m. Eastern time and 4
4
p.m.
p.m. And I'll be posting everything in every single Facebook group that I am a member of that's asexual, as I have been the last few days. So I apologize if you get 20 million messages, but but I'm like, if I don't tell people, they don't know.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Thanks for coming,
Bye.
everybody. Thanks for listening
Thanks,
to us
everybody.
go on about trauma. It's been good.
Bye-bye.
No
Bye.
tears. Bye.